Morning all. I've given the docking computer concept a lot of thought, and it does carry very high risk in many types of positions. To be tempted to actually play forcing variations if you're actually aware of forcing lines. Other quieter moves might be better. It's sometimes better not to go through a forcing sequence. So there's a big risk. So I just want to emphasize again the 5 main tips on the original tips video I gave you, and the first one being strategic crush, for example, as the major tip, and then there was another tip about positional sacrifices to emphasize things. There was one about getting potentially losing trump cards from the openings. There was one about how weaknesses can be exploitable or not if they're actually weaknesses. The 5th tip, appreciating little details in the position which might be significant to the strategic plan. So it's still relevant things like why you can't say queen of pass pawn because of this particular resource which blockades. So that's very, very relevant analysis for strategic plans. So that's again separate from an examination of these guaranteed if-then sequences. Okay. The thing is, we're sort of working on a 6th tip for a separate kind of analysis of position based on guaranteed if-then moves, which sounds good in principle maybe, but sometimes and often it will be the case where the final position isn't clearly a mate or anything, and you might be thinking you're winning material, but it's not the end of the game, and the opponent still, can do horrible things. So it's these unclear endpoints of a guaranteed if-then sequence which you need to still strategically, I think, evaluate. So it's this combination of calculation and evaluation, even with these guaranteed if-thens. So here, if we revisit this example after rook f1, my opponent was winning anyway if he had played h5. He is a rook up, but there's a very interesting imbalance here between the centre pawns and the extra rook. And there's a temptation to look at a forcing sequence, an utterly forcing sequence, based on the docking computer concept of rook takes f1, and then a further checks either on b1 or d3. The thing is, I think it's better to think of a docking agent versus a docking computer. A docking agent, you're basically is a sign of combining, like, you want to have strategic intelligence at the end positions. So if we look at even rook takes f1, we've weakened white's king, we've brought the king towards the centre. So the docking agent should be telling you strategically what's going on. The queen is in the centre here, and if we follow this if-then sequence, if we follow queen d3 check, okay, the queen is slightly decentralized. It hasn't got access to e5 anymore. And definitely after d1, the queen is decentralized. It hasn't got access to either the light squares or the dark squares now. So we can say, even if this is the final destination now, with h6, we have to get a strategic evaluation of what's happened, and that the queen is essentially being decentralized away from the king. King safety is thus reduced, and these pieces can actually crawl out on this exploitable weakness. G7 is now an exploitable weakness in various ways, either with what was played, queen g6 or queen b8, just to get the rook to g3, and that spells the end of the game. So basically this final end destination is a total disaster, and it was based on the temptation to play forcing moves. So really, I think the docking computer concept is in a lot of cases flawed, because it has the same flaws as the old computers, the horizon effect. What is beyond the horizon? We can't see beyond the horizon ourselves. We're not very good calculators, so we have to sort of have this instinctive grip on the position of the strategic essentials. The centre, king safety, stuff like that helps us navigate the position, the principles of the position. And so you can kind of contrast this destination strategically as well. That actually here the queen, if queen e1 is used, then at least the king's safety is not as bad. So there's a strategic evaluation here without looking any further. And after queen takes a2, we also can note, tactical things like f2 is now vulnerable, and the queen can get back into the centre. So again, strategic evaluation about the queen being in the centre, access to these key central squares, which will help defence. So we've got to really evaluate the destinations, basically, because otherwise it's very dangerous sometimes in many positions which are inconclusive, to be led off to a really bad position just by this temptation of actually playing forcing moves. So I think it's quite simple. We're saying in a lot of cases you can get from your current position, call it A, to a destination B by force, by a series of guaranteed if-then moves. The thing is, when it's not conclusive, in these cases the whole concept might be flawed. You've got to make sure you're strategically sensitive to what's going on and to what is happening in that final destination, because that might mean, okay, you might look further and realise your king's too weak, but without the strategic evaluation then you have no sense of danger. Like, I had no sense of danger here, that my king was kind of weak, but there should be, because the queen's kind of out of the picture now. It's completely out of the picture for defending the king. This is a terrible destination. It might have been a good temptation to look at forcing moves like an old computer, but beyond the horizon lies the black king being mated here. For example, check and just rook g3, and there's absolutely no time for e2 and e1. e2 queen c7, end of game. So that lied beyond the horizon. I've emulated a poor computer in the old days, which horizon effect. So I think the docking computer is a bad version 1. I think what we need is, okay, in a lot of cases it's going to be conclusive. Maybe you're guaranteed if-thens. You can see clearly winning material. You still got a grip on the centre. You haven't damaged your king's safety, etc., etc. Everything is all okay. But in many other cases, you might be thinking you're winning material, and you might stop calculating then. But you've really got to really try and evaluate the position, just intuitively, because as this position shows, it's just like lost in this example. And there's going to be many examples like this. So basically, you can't. If you're being tempted with forcing moves, you've got to see what strategic direction and what's happening strategically to your pieces, especially king safety, centralization, and there might be other things: pawn structure, the loss of the two bishops, the weakening of squares, and these are at the end points of your guaranteed if-then moves. Okay, so basically, if this is going to be tip 6 of the tip structure I've given you, it is going to be not conflicting with the idea of strategic crush, because you've got to be strategically sensitive on the endpoints, and in that way there's no contradiction to this as an additional tool in the tool set. I hope this video is clear. I'll try and put notes in the description, or maybe other concrete examples later. So I think the idea is docking agents is better as a concept, with these additional ideas of really strongly evaluating the end positions. Also, I wanted to note that even from the openings of games or early on, you can detect tactical vulnerabilities, and the use of forcing variations should really be a sort of emphasis of those tactical vulnerabilities as well as trying to discover new tactical vulnerabilities or hidden ones. So in the Elephant Gambit, or even in this game, as soon as the opponent played h4 in the opening with this idea of the rook maneuver, way from the opening, alarm bells could have been initially set off about g7 being weak, and to try and discover and be aware that the use of checking forcing moves later should involve checking for attacks, coordinated attacks on g7, and that would also help calculation. You can spot intuitively tactical vulnerabilities earlier on, and then sort of be aware that there's going to be forcing moves relating to those. So that's another thing about the docking agent. So two major aspects I wanted to sort of emphasize here: to be strategically sensitive on the endpoints, and also this idea you can also anticipate the use of forcing variations based on tactical vulnerabilities identified earlier on. Thanks very much.